I see we have a pretty big audience out there. Excellent, excellent. Good morning, or depending on where you are, good afternoon. And for some of you looking at the attendee list, I think it's even good evening. My name is Kevin Walsh. I'm Vice President of ISP Business Development with Netskrt Systems. And today's Surfside chat is kind of interesting for me anyway. We're going to talk about the impact of live streaming on ISP networks. And the term tsunami was chosen intentionally. It is, as you'll see here, a fundamentally different beast than the type of streaming that we've been dealing with for, well, really well over a decade now. I'm pleased to have with us today two industry luminaries, Sig Luft, who's founder and CEO of Netskrt Systems, also owns his own ISP, and Jason Thibault, longtime experts in streaming video in general. So Sig, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about this subject?
Sure. Well, I mean, my career's been in networking pretty much my entire career. And I've always bounced into the topic of video over and over again. And the reason video keeps coming up is because it generates so much data. Roll back a decade or so, I did start an ISP. Generally speaking, it was to serve personal objectives like getting good internet where I was. But it's actually grown, and it's actually developed into a great learning experience. Having built the equipment that runs these networks, I actually have to use that equipment. What I did see with that ISP was the amount of impact video actually had on carrier networks, and more people I talk to, the more consistent the message is. In my case, traffic grew in the order of 200 times, sometimes more, and it's all video streaming. So it's hard to build a business when you're chasing that much growth constantly, and that was really the impetus to get together with the team and work on Netskrt.
Excellent, excellent. And Jason, you've been lurking around this space, I think also pretty much from the beginning. What drove you into it?
I like that term, lurking, and I'm going to change my LinkedIn bio to say luminary. I love that word too. And even more, I love the fact that Sig, that you started an ISP because you wanted better bandwidth where you live. That is the absolute best. Yeah, I don't know. I think to be honest, I kind of fell into this industry. So I did a startup. It unfortunately went down with the dot bomb in 2002. Went into consulting, turned around, did another startup. Tried to raise money in 2008. Oh, bad idea. And then I landed a job with the technical recruiter who we used for my startup, and she found me this spot at a CDN called Limelight Networks, and that was in sort of mid 2000s. And then it's just it's been just from there straight streaming video. And I think I found it most interesting because it is such a challenge to deliver streaming video with scale and resiliency like people expect broadcast television to be. And I think that's what really kept me in the industry. I mean, I kind of bounced out to another tech industry, but that was such a challenge. Like, how do you transition millions of concurrent, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of concurrent users from broadcast television to streaming video? And those challenges have really sort of, absorbed my attention. And then when I went from Limelight Networks to the Streaming Video, at the time Streaming Video Alliance, and I think my work anniversary just clicked. So I've been there for 7 years.
Wow.
It's so fun to be in the middle of it all, right? So no longer on the vendor side, I'm not on the content side. I'm in the middle, helping all these people sort of, herd the cats to solve some of these big problems. And that has definitely been a very exciting and fulfilling aspect of being in this space of streaming video.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks a lot again for joining us, Sig and Jason, and we will dive into it. Let me first kind of set the table a little bit, and then this whole thing, by the way, for the audience purposes, is structured as We didn't want to use the term fireside chat because that's a little bit dated, and a lot of us live near the ocean, and that's more amenable. But we want to structure this more as a conversation between Sig and Jason. But in order to set the table, as both Sig and Jason alluded to, streaming video is ubiquitous, but live, we believe, is fundamentally different. It is video, but the behavior of that, for reasons that both Sig and Jason will go into, is fundamentally different than what we've seen in the past. And it portends some pretty significant challenges for ISPs. Frankly, it has the potential to swamp ISP networks. The potentially adverse impacts of live streaming start with poor video quality. And this is really the driver for a lot of what we're doing at Netskrt. This isn't true everywhere, but it is true in a significant subset of the viewing population. The streaming experience they're getting is not what they expect. To Jason's point, they expect a one-to-one replacement with broadcast TV in terms of quality, and many of them are watching this on 4K TVs. We were joking before we started about the Vision Pro, which, believe it or not, the Apple's Vision Pro has 2 4K screens, one in front of each eye. So it's an awful lot of capacity at $3,500, so I'm not in a hurry to go out and buy one. The problems for ISPs, though, inefficient capacity utilization. At moments in time, as Sig will go into in more detail, backhaul and upstream networks become overloaded, and that causes severe consequences, not only for streaming itself, but even for other applications that may themselves be able to recover from that congestion and that packet loss. But it's rarely a good thing if you introduce a new flow onto your network that causes that level of disruption. And the bottom line for most ISPs that are on this call today is unhappy customers. And unfortunately, when customers are unhappy, they rarely call the streaming platform and say, hey, something's not right. They call their local ISP. And maybe that's not fair, but that's just the way it is. So for these reasons, we think, and we're not alone in this. I mean, I've talked to a lot of ISPs, and they see these impacts as well. So let's get into it then. Clearly, live, over-the-top video streaming is exploding. Jason, maybe you can start out by kind of outlining from a business level, why is this happening?
Well, I mean, we talk about a lot of this in the industry, and I think what really shifted this there's 2 things. The first is the shift from what is traditional broadcast, so we'll call that QAM or SDI, and those legacy protocols and delivery methods. Those got sort of unshackled when broadcasters moved to IP. So now you've got broadcasters, IP networks. Once the video signal is just bits and bytes, you can now deliver it anywhere. And that actually sort of leaned into what consumers really want, which is I want to be able to watch whatever I want on my TV on any device that I have, anywhere that I want, at any time. And so we saw really early offerings of this, such as IPTV, right? We saw, broadcasters moving in that direction, and consumers then sort of started to get this like, whoa, I can get this stuff. Like I can get my television where I want it. And there were some kludgy kind of attempts at like Sling TV and ways to sort of make that happen before this transition really occurred. And then this transition hit, and what the content owners saw was, oh, I can now have a direct relationship to my consumer. I don't have to get into carriage rights with cable operators anymore. I can just deliver directly. Everything's IP. And so now that all the content's digital, it's all IP based, it's all being delivered over the internet. Consumers are now glomming onto that even more, right? I don't want any of that old cable stuff in my house. I don't want box. We don't need any of that. I have my streaming platforms. And so you can see this is sort of like a snowball effect, right? It started out as a little and then bigger, and it kept rolling down the hill. And to be honest, it's still rolling down the hill because streaming is not, anywhere near the size still of broadcast television, but it gives people what they want, where they want it, and how they want it. And then from the content owner's perspective, by the way, which is feeding into that consumer need, is when video is all about bits and bytes, it throws off so much data, so much information about viewers that cable operators and folks could never get. And so this is all just feeding itself, this loop of content operators, the owners, they want more data, the consumers want all of that stuff where they want it. The delivery folks, like the network operators, are like, okay, let's ditch the cable and move all to broadband subscriptions. So this is all just feeding in on itself. Lots of trends coalescing into this explosion that we're seeing.
Okay. And Sig, you touched on that as well in your preamble there, but do you want to build on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's certainly from an ISP operator, I saw that growth occur massively over the last decade. And really, I think there's a new shift where live events have traditionally been somewhat limited. I think there's a number of factors, some business oriented, but I do think there's a lot of technical hurdles still out there in terms of supporting a major event. And what we have seen now in the past couple of years is really the sudden increase of investment in taking live events. I mean, we have a nice slide there, sort of a landscape slide. If you take a look at the amount of money being spent out there to bring premium live events or in a direct-to-consumer model, it's massive. And I think here's where we're seeing a major shift again. And as we say with the tsunami concept, that data is now increasing an entire order of magnitude greater. And then, if you take it down to the bits and the bytes perspective, a lot of the streaming that has occurred up to now, there's a bit of flexibility in terms of, not everybody's watching the same Netflix show at the same time. So there's a bit of balancing across networks as to how much data is being instantaneously used. You start looking at events like this, everybody wants to see that, touchdown at the exact same moment. And if it's not the exact same moment, it better be pretty darn close. So you're starting to talk to, there's maybe about a 6-second window of flexibility, whereas, watching the next episode or next release of Stranger Things, there'll be a lot of people watching, but it'll be spread out, not over a 6-second window. It'll be spread out over, hours and days. So I think there's this new sort of phenomenon coming, and at least in my mind, it's a new iteration in the overall direct-to-consumer journey.
And I want to comment, Sig. So, you pointed out that like looking at the Sunday ticket. So where was the Sunday ticket usually? DirecTV, right? So that was a traditional delivery satellite provider. What the content owners now, like the NFL, are starting to realize is there's a lot of money to be made with licensing those rights to streaming operators, because again, people want more people have access to the streaming platforms than do DirecTV. Because if I'm not a DirecTV subscriber, I don't have a satellite dish, I don't have a box in my house, I can't get that content. So the NFL realizes, whoa, we release that to the streaming operators, we'll make money because they'll pay more for licensing rights, and we'll reach more people. So I think that's absolutely a perfect example to point out is NFL, how it shifted away from broadcast folks to the streaming folks, because there is not only is there equal demand there, but there's more money to be made.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there was also, I was at the Streaming West back in, I think it was November last year. And they had a person from Amazon talking about Thursday Night Football and just some metrics in terms of how many transactions occurred during the game at the moment an ad placed. And of course, Amazon sells as well as distributes. It was phenomenal. This feedback loop is really remarkable. And I think everybody in that ecosystem benefits from that.
No, they do. And I think that concept is really important to point out in this sort of live OTT streaming explosion. That experience, the OTT experience, provides so much more opportunity for interstitial commerce, things you can do that you couldn't do in broadcast. And mind you, they tried, right? So back in the day, we had MoCA, we had OCAP. There were these attempts to put apps so that people could click buttons on their remote and kind of try to buy something or do something. And it was a horrible failure, but clearly people wanted to do that. And, that data from Amazon in that presentation was like, yes, that's the future. And that's why all of the rights holders want to push into streaming, because that opportunity exists that they just didn't have before.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
So you've both done a great job then painting a picture of this is inevitable. It's upon us. It's happening right now. And Jason, as you point out, it's going to get even worse. So I'm an ISP, let's pretend. And so far, Sig, maybe you can hit on this first, since you wear those shoes. What have I done to deal with this so far in general?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, I've seen about a 200-fold increase in the average consumption from my subscribers. So what have I done? Well, I've actually increased my capacity first 2 times, then 5 times. I think I've increased it by 100-fold now. But do recall, there's about 200 times more consumption. So I'm chasing it constantly. And so that, I think is by and large what most ISPs have done. Now there are still dependencies. Even though I've built this capacity out, I am still at the mercy of the upstream peering partners and so on to have followed that same growth trajectory. So it's not a perfect story. It's certainly an important part of the story, but it's not the perfect answer.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, does that comport with your perspective?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, thankfully at the SVTA, we get to interact with a lot of, tier 1 ISPs, right? So the Verizons, the Comcasts, the Telefonicas, and it's interesting to hear them talk about what they're doing to deal with this, sudden demand for live sports. And obviously, like Sig said, it's all about bandwidth and capacity. The upstream capacity. So at the peering fabrics, are the folks delivering me this content, have they done a good job of making sure that they have the capacity, at the exchanges to pass that content to me? On the ISP side, they might be doing things like putting in multicast ABR within the network in order to help mitigate the amount of content that they're delivering through their mid-tier. They also might implement a lot of edge caching solutions, right, in order to help distribute that content around to more users and not have too many bottlenecks where infrastructure might tip over because there's a sudden spike. Like, so, here's an example. Somebody calls somebody else, or 1,000 friends call 10,000 other friends and say like, oh my God, you got to turn the game on. It's on Amazon Prime. It's really exciting right now. This last 3 minutes of the fourth quarter in this football game. And all of a sudden, the lights on the ISP NOCs all go into the red because there's this huge demand. So they're implementing caches. There's a lot of use now of 5G and network slicing and being able to partition and better manage network traffic, prioritizing network traffic. There's even some ISPs who will utilize peer-to-peer solutions, sort of a content delivery fabric using traditional CDN caches and peer-to-peer. They're literally trying to do anything they can in order to make sure that their viewers have a really good experience. So like what Sig said, it's increased bandwidth, it's implement new solutions, it's kind of like it's whack-a-mole, right? Every time they turn around, there's something else that's causing a problem. They're like, oh my gosh, we got to implement something to fix that. So it's they're trying everything that they possibly can to make sure that more people can concurrently watch a higher bitrate version of a live stream.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And about the only thing I would comment on is when you see those numbers that Kevin had placed up there, those are big numbers. Those are from last year to this year. So it's bound to have an impact. It's bound to change. As there's another few moles just suddenly showed up in the whack-a-mole thing.
Yeah, they're coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned an entirely new expression. Sig and I were speaking to an ISP a couple of weeks ago, and this guy said, Thursday nights used to be kind of quiet, and now they have this phenomenon. And I won't name the streaming platform, but you can probably figure it out. They've got this term called the Thursday night spike, and it's something, you know, they weren't involved in the discussions or planning for that. So they were just the recipient of the traffic out of the blue. So that probably is a good segue. And Sig, here, maybe again, you can kick this off. We've talked around this issue a lot, and I think there's no question that live is a force that will not be slowed down. It's like, you know, can you hold back the tide? Probably not. Can you stop live? Don't think so.
Yeah.
But why is it, if we delve into the technology, why is it different? Why is it so hard?
Well, I mean, you know, the simple answer is the word there, live. You know, there's an expectation that you get an instantaneous response. So when you break down the technology, the cameras that are filming the event are feeding that information in. It's getting transcoded, and basically they've got a pretty narrow window for, okay, here's the next frame, here's the next frame, here's the next. So there's a bit of a gap there. I mean, everybody's aware that you know, even on cable, it's not 100% live, but it's close. And but the main point is once that encoding step has been done, you're getting a chunk of data going out every 6 seconds. And so now if you're a device that is distributing that data, you know, okay, 6 seconds out it goes, 6 seconds out it goes. And you got 100 people receiving it, no problem. You got 1,000 people, no problem. You got 100,000 people, okay, it's now starting to be a pretty big wave of data. You got 1 million people, oh my God, you literally do have a tsunami coming down the pipes. And it's really that fundamental fact that I think creates all of this trouble. And so then you end up looking at the ecosystem from the point of origin all the way down to the ISP. And there are peering partners, there are exchanges up and down the pipeline. And you know, if you're one of these large providers of these live events, you're probably talking to everybody down the stream. And okay, for Sunday night, I need you to go from whatever 100 gig capacity to 400 gig capacity. And not everybody's going to say, what's the return on investment to build out 4 times the capacity for something that happens once a week, you know, for a season. It's a hard business case to get everybody aligned on that strategy. So that, I think, is where you start to see, okay, it's a sudden introduction of amounts of.
We lose Sig.
I think we did. I wasn't sure if it was me or if we lost Sig.
Sig.
That is really pondering a serious point. I know I've had. Why don't Jason? Why don't you jump in there?
I can riff off of what Sig was saying. He's exactly right. So from the SVTA perspective, right, the workflow for producing live streams is super complicated. There's lots of things like ad signaling, blackout signaling. There are lots of things around, like what Sig talked about, encoding, transcoding. You've got multiple streams and a bit rate ladder. It's really complex. It's way harder when you're trying to do that live because you have to do it all in real time versus on demand, which is just get out a stored asset and deliver the bits. From an ISP perspective, right, they're getting that, we'll call it that bit stream that's already had all that complexity built into it. They're getting the finished bytes and they're moving it through their network and they're delivering it out to their end users. The problem all comes about scale and resiliency. Right. So if you don't have the capacity, like what Sig said, 100 users, no problem. 1,000 users, no problem. 100,000 users, you know, all of a sudden, have I reserved enough capacity? Do I have enough capacity in my edges and my caches to support that many concurrent users at that bit rate? Right. So if everybody wants the 4K bit rate, then all of a sudden it's, well, I've got even less capacity than I thought I did. Many ISPs will, turn the bit rate down, to be honest, in order to make sure people still have a good experience. 720p is still an excellent visual experience, but it's not 4K. So people can get a little bit out of shape about that. But it's all about scalability and resiliency. How many can I support at the same time? And if something fails, how quickly can it fail over to something else that's working? So if a cache goes down in a region, can I make sure that there's another cache that picks up the load until I can get that one spun back up again? So, I mean, that's really the, Sig. Hey, welcome back, Sig.
Apologies.
I was
have a chat with Apple and let them know that my bloody iPad has a habit of rebooting itself.
I was just riffing on what you said. Yeah. So anyway, so that's it. That's really what it's about. It's when it gets down to the ISP, it's all about scalability and resiliency, and that's where everything comes down to capacity planning and, again, things like multicast ABR within the network. Can I use peer-to-peer? How do I increase scale and capacity when I may not have the physical capacity, in the pipes available? Mm-hmm. That makes it hard. It makes it really, really hard.
Right. So Sig, we lost you, and unfortunately, Jason picked up the football and ran with it without missing a beat. But building on that touchdown, we're going to stay with the football motif. I guess maybe it was a mistake to go with the tsunami. We should have stuck with football. But hey, it's the middle of the summer. Nobody's thinking about football right now. So, but I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about the business case. I'm an ISP. I don't have this graph here, but it is available in a white paper that we've got published on the website that shows over the past 5, 6, 7 years the amount of downstream bandwidth that the typical ISP is delivering to their customers, and that graph is overlaid with the amount of money they get from those customers, the ARPU for those customers. And it's remarkable because, not surprisingly, the amount of bandwidth is up and to the right. The amount of money is almost flat. So I'm being squeezed. And now you're telling me there's this whole new thing called live that's going to be shoved down my network. How do I square that business case, sir?
Yeah, and I think Jason and I'm sure you touched on other points, but I did pick up on the caching piece, which is obviously a topic near and dear to me. Really one of the key mechanisms that brings a means to solve this is to move the point of congestion. So there's one aspect, which is I can keep increasing my part of the pipe, but can I depend on the guy upstream from me from increasing their part of the pipe? And that is, it's a non-deterministic outcome. And I think when you look at it from the other side, from the content generators, how many points downstream can I interact with to make sure everything is planned out? And I think what we're seeing is that there is an appetite to let's consolidate on working with the ISPs themselves to make sure that the right infrastructure is at least in one point in the network.
Okay, well that's probably a good segue into the next topic then.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
We've touched on it a little bit, but Jason, I'd be interested in hearing from you because you, as you said before, you're kind of in the middle. So it's a good place to be in this regard. You've got, each side considers you to be their friend, so they'll confide in you, whereas they might not. You're like Switzerland in this equation. But what would your advice be to ISPs that are wrestling with this? I mean, they want to deliver a quality experience to their subscribers, even if the problem is not caused by themselves. They still want to do that.
Yeah, it's again, this is where it gets really complicated because delivering a live experience is not just on the ISP. It's not just on the content owner. It's not just on CDN partners. Like it can be a whole host of things. I mean, so. Probably one of the best strategies is to make sure the ISP is working with those content providers. there's a lot of folks like, just pick some of the big folks, right? So NFL, NBC Sports, like some of the streaming providers, DAZN, like working with them to ensure that one, there's a clear line of communication so that we understand if there's a problem in the ISP network, it can be communicated upstream, and so they can deal with that problem as it happens. But then also if there are issues that a content provider who's streaming a live event is experiencing, they have the ability to contact the ISP to say, hey, listen, we're seeing some problems with XYZ. Can you help us out? Oh yeah. So we saw the big issue. Somebody ran into a pole and took out part of our trunk, and now we're like, and so it's first and foremost, the number one strategy is to remain in constant communication with those big live event providers. But when you can't do that, right, the next step is to ensure that there are adequate mechanisms in the network for resiliency. Even if you can't guarantee delivering the highest bitrate stream, at least you can guarantee delivering the stream, right? So sometimes that is the most important aspect, is to make sure that the content is available. I think from a viewer perspective, one of the biggest issues is if the screen just goes dark or it freezes, or, I can't get the next chunk. And so, my buffer's empty on my player, and I'm kind of like, do I restart the player? What do I do? The viewer starts to freak out because that's not how the TV operates. So that's
yeah, I was just going to say that's exactly sort of the from an ISP perspective, exactly what I see. The first complaint is it's not working. Anything that prevents it from working, you're in a doghouse. And then once that's all stable, then the next thing, it's not the highest quality it could be.
That's right.
But there is a pecking order as it comes down.
We all know consumers are going to complain, right? They're going to complain about something, and it could be their own home network that is causing the issue. And the ISPs unfortunately get that first call. And so being able to, again, remain in constant communication with everybody and be part of sort of the event team that's happening. But, the next step is really just to assure the customer, hey, the network is doing the best that it can to deliver the highest quality video to you. Could be an issue. Like, you can't say, even though you want to say, when was the last time you restarted your router? Go to fast.com and just look at the speed that you're getting from Netflix. And if it says 2 megabits per second, not our problem. We've all seen these issues, right? So it's really ensuring that the stream comes so that there is content available. And then that last strategy is long-term, how do we ensure that we can distribute and deliver out that content at a higher bit rate at that scale? And that involves a lot of network planning and a lot of equipment planning. It may be involved in upgrading, core network equipment like routers and load balancers and things like that. It might involve upgrading caches and implementing even deeper caches into the network. So there are long-term strategies that should be explored, but definitely those first two, be in communication with everybody and definitely make sure that the stream is deliverable above all else.
So on that point, and this is interesting because so be in communication, and is both of there are literally thousands of ISPs in the U.S. By some counts, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 ISPs, and a proportionally similar number in Canada. Obviously, if you're AT&T or Verizon or Comcast, you call up, the streaming platform and stay in communication with them. But we deal a lot with community-based rural ISPs that have a lot of bandwidth. I mean, they've got, gigabit to the home, fiber in many cases. Obviously, they can't deal directly with the streaming platform because they're too small. The streaming platform doesn't want to bother them. So, Sig, how does the rural, and even in many cases ex-urban ISP deal with this?
Yeah, and I think the question of putting caches out in the field, and I think there's been an evolution in terms of who can and what kind of caches can go out there. Once upon a time, anybody could put a cache in there and it would actually do something useful. And the advent of security and rights management and everything else, in many cases, the ability to put a cache into your network has kind of constrained down to literally being the CDNs are the only people who have the authority to distribute this content, or in certain cases the OTT providers themselves have a solution like Netflix, for example. But in all these cases, again, it's all being geared towards the large vendors, and moving down the food chain to the tier fours and which I'm one of the smaller ones, but I still like to be loved. These devices really aren't purpose built for the smaller ISPs. So we see a role for, number one, not just the cache being placed into the ISP network, but managed by a CDN. And so while you may not have 100% direct line of communication, you better believe that the CDN is performing that role for you. And so I think there's a multitude of benefits. And so now you have a scenario where there is a cache, you've got the live event, and then it comes down to, what is the cache actually doing? How is it a better strategy? Well, again, let's say you're a smaller ISP, maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000 subscribers. Probably a good bet that vast majority of them are watching one of these big events. So all that traffic is now going right through your network. And maybe you fixed all those bottlenecks. Now it's going up your backhaul, maybe even fix that, who knows? It's hitting the next thing up, and now it's all going, downstream. If you have a cache in your network, you're really addressing a couple points. One is the amount of traffic coming into your network is, notionally a couple copies of the event. And now that cache is fanning it out into your network. So there's a number of technical benefits there. But you're fundamentally taking control of the upstream issues that are happening. And if it's done with a CDN, the CDN itself is monitoring that device, it's monitoring how it's performing, and it is in communication for sure with the event distributor. So you're kind of getting into that same type of ecosystem that the big boys have.
That's a really great. I'm glad you focused on the caching, because that is like, I kind of touched on it as sort of that third part of the strategy. It is really important to have caching in the network, because one is it really mitigates that sort of mid-tier backhaul, right? You're not passing all of this content through your network. You've got it in cache, and people are then getting it from the cache instead of from some peering partner who's terminating on your network and just dumping traffic into you. So I think it is really important, but the fact that that you called out that having it managed, right? So a managed cache, anybody can go build a cache, right? Go get some varnish software, slap it on a box, put it in your network. Yay, I have a reverse proxy. I'm a cache now. But the question the ISP has to ask himself is, am I a CDN? Like, do I want to do that? No. I think having a managed box in the network for smaller ISPs is an absolute perfect strategy for mitigating a lot of that upstream traffic issues that would normally happen with live events. And then that, like you said, if it's part of a managed CDN, it then puts you into contact, and it puts you in that communication chain of the live event distributor, so that if something does happen, you're now part of that. Oh, look. Oh, yeah. Hey, sorry, we had a little bit of blip right there. It's all fixed now. We got it resolved.
Yeah.
Good. Well, excellent. I tell you what, that leads us to, we've got a few minutes for Q&A. We're targeting this at 45 minutes. I did get some questions from the audience while you were both talking. So let me find out where my mouse went first, and we'll take a few audience questions. And some of these, to some degree, we might have spoken to already, but I think it's useful to see, how this is being received by the ISPs in the audience. One of them, stated that, and I've heard this also, and I know, Sig, you have too. They get these complaints from their subscribers in real time. Something's wrong with the network. What I do as an ISP is I go look at my backbone connection, and maybe I've got a 10 gig connection, and I'm running 2, 3, 4 gig, and life is fine. It looks like everything is as it's supposed to be. What gives? Sig, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in many cases, it's it is one of your upstream peering partners. They perhaps have a cache, and that cache is rated for 100 gig, just to pick a number out of the air, and you are a piece of that. They're also serving a bunch of other ISPs where the sum total of the traffic is, well, greater than 100 gig, and so they're stressing out and they're unable to deliver. Now from your perspective, it looks all just fine, and they can't fulfill all the requests that your network is demanding. There can be other more nuanced issues around how the packets are bursting through the network, microburst and switching and buffer overflow, things that are less obvious and are more in keeping, well, not in keeping, more of a phenomenon that live introduces into the mix. So there's a variety of things that could be causing it. And again, you may have done everything you could, and it actually has nothing to do with you, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Right. Interesting. And by the way, for those of you at home, I know that SIG is one of the people that wrote the software back in the day for weighted random early detect packet discard mechanism. So if you want to go down to bare metal, he could probably do it. Another question, and this is another one, Jason, maybe it's in your wheelhouse, that I've heard a lot from ISPs. They did what they were supposed to do a decade ago, and more or less, in instituting the triple play. I've got broadband, I've got IPTV, and I've got VoIP. Does this trend toward over-the-top streaming, all of the video going over broadband, what does that mean for my linear TV offerings if I have any? Is that something I should still invest in, or is that, how should I view that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great question.
Maybe that's a whole other
webinar. Yeah, I think there's a lot of experimentation happening to try to figure out what the right bundle is. I know that there's big talk now in the industry about bundling streaming services together because consumers don't want a bunch of individual subscriptions. So maybe the ISP plays a role in handling the billing for that sort of replaces the linear TV. Again, but you don't want to place linear TV because, to be honest, not everybody is streaming. So, we always talk about streaming. Well, there's so many people. Okay, so let's just say there's 50 million people streaming at one time. Okay, just in the US, the United States, that's only about 20% of the people that are available, right? So they're all watching linear TV. And so there's a really fine line to sort of like, should I ditch this part of this triple play, this part of this bundle that consumers seem to like, or should I figure out how to bundle something that more appeals to what's happening now? So maybe there is still a linear that's part of that. Maybe there's a linear plus streaming. Maybe it's, who knows? But what I see right now is ISPs, both rural and big, are experimenting. They're trying to figure out where the sweet spot is for viewers in terms of getting the value they want from their ISP. I want bandwidth. I know I got to have that. Maybe I don't need VoIP anymore because I got a mobile phone. Oh, wait, my ISP can handle my mobile phone. Okay, boom, I got another bundle, and then maybe it's, I got a couple of streaming services, but I want just basic linear. So I get my news channels. I don't have to watch my news on streaming because it doesn't always work locally sometimes. So it's really a process of trial and error right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that in many cases, independent of whether or not you're offering a linear package, the fact of the matter is some of these events that we're alluding to from a live perspective, those big numbers aren't there because you can get it from multiple places. Those big numbers are there because they're exclusivity deals. And so if you want to watch Sunday night or Thursday night, there's only one place you can get it. So I see this as sort of being a complementary step where you got one foot in both camps. You're still doing what your customers are paying for, but guess what? If they want to watch football on Thursday night, they better have an Amazon account or a Google account on Sunday night. And so I think the industry is sort of forcing this along a little bit. Perhaps maybe at an uncomfortable pace for some people, but the fact of the matter is there will be two horses in the race for a while.
Well, good. I think that probably wraps it up. Jason, I appreciate what you said there, because as far as the streaming bundling, because my wife and I are tired of having to Google to find out where the show we want to watch is streamed from, and that's just
discovery and streaming is broken. We all know in the industry that it's broken. We have not figured out a way to fix it yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. Well, Sig and Jason, again, thanks a lot. For those of you had a pretty big audience here, this session will be available on our website shortly. And by the way, if you want to scan that QR code, you can get a cache deployed into your network in pretty short order. So I'll leave that up there for a moment. But again, Jason and Sig, thanks a lot. And we'll do this again soon.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Kevin.
All right.
Yep. Thanks, Kevin. It's great. Appreciate it. All right. Bye.